Okay, let's read this problem and try to solve it. Given a two-dimensional grid representing robot positions over multiple time steps, determine if the movement sequence is valid. The rules are: the grid consists of zeros and ones, where 1 represents a robot and 0 represents an empty space. Robots can only move to the adjacent position, left, right, or directly below, in the next time step. The number of robots must remain consistent across all time steps. A two-dimensional array, this is the input, where each row represents a time step and each column represents a position, an integer representing the expected number of robots, and the output is a boolean really. It returns true if the robot movement sequence is valid, it returns false if the movement is illegal, or at least if the number of robots is inconsistent. So we have a valid case in which the robot had moved to the right, and this is an edge case, bear in mind. That means it cannot move to the left, it can only move to the right. And in here, because it's equivalent to the last index, so it cannot move to the right, it can only move to the left. It can move below also, so this is a legit case and it produces true. However, if we looked at this case, the robot didn't move to the left, didn't move to the right, and most certainly it didn't remain in its place, so it will produce false. Now we have an understanding of this problem. Let's jump to the code and try to implement it. So I'm just gonna define a static function, and this function will return a boolean. It's called isValidGrid, and what we need to pass in as parameters, we need to pass in an integer that is the number of robots, and we also need either jagged array or maybe rectangular array. If you're certain that both of the arrays, or all of the arrays really, because there could be more than 2 arrays, preserve the same length or have the same length, so just use rectangular array. If not, which is of course not mentioned in the case, so I'm just going to use a jagged array. Okay, and I'm just going to call it array. And since we're dealing with columns and rows, so I'm just going to define a row, starts with 0, and row is less than number of robots, row plus plus, I'm sorry, not number of robots, but array dot length. We shouldn't listen to the IntelliSense all the time. And then the columns. Okay, and before that I need really to define robot numbers equals 0 to be able to sequentially increment it. And now, in case we move on to the next iteration, I need to make sure that this robot number preserves its value equals 0. Okay, now we have the case of row and column equal 1, and in case of 1, let's just deal first with the generic cases in which the robot is in one of the middle positions, not the edge positions or the edge cases. So in that case, I'm just going to define a boolean called valid move, and this boolean will be the array of row plus 1 and column equals 1. Okay, so that means, for example, this one will preserve its position, will remain in its old position. Okay, so this is a case. Or maybe, I'm just going to copy this one, maybe it will move to the right, and maybe it will move to the left. These are the positions in which they'll produce a valid case, right? However, we need to deal with this one first. If it moves to the right, we need to make sure that it's not at the end of the array, because if it's at the end of the array, then that would be out of range. So we need to make sure that the column is less than the array of row plus 1 dot length, minus 1, because again the length is 4 but the index is 3, so we need to make sure that it's less than 3, so it's here at least. Okay, and of course is and to preserve the priority we will be wrapping them around parentheses or parentheses. Okay, all right. Yeah, I believe that's true. And then of course the case that it moves to the left needs to be dealt with in the basis that it's not 0, so the column is not 0, and okay, now if this is valid, so easily, if it's not valid, then easily return false. Now as long as you move inside this case, okay, I'm just gonna increase the robot numbers. Okay, and at the end of this for each iteration, I'm just gonna do a quick validation. If robot numbers does not equal number of robots, then return false. Okay, otherwise just simply return true. Okay, so now let's try to pass in some parameters. So is valid grid, I'm just going to pass in to the number of robots, and then I'm just going to use the first case, the first example, new integer. Okay, okay, that should produce true. Okay, we have out of range. Out of range is because that we're dealing with row plus 1, but there's really no guarantee that the row plus 1 will be within the range. So we need to make sure that this is a valid case, and to do that we need to make sure that the row, okay, is less than array.length minus 1, and if it is as such, then we just move this logic all inside of it. And now, okay, this is false. It says false, but it should be true, right? It should be true. Okay, so we're missing something in here. We're missing something vital, which is this one. Okay, this one should move out of the scope. True. Okay, now let's try this one. Okay, this one should be false. So hopefully it will produce the right result. Okay, so now it's correct. Thank you.